Welcome back, learner. Right now, as you're listening to this, you are probably doing something that is subtly destroying your jawline, uh, raising your blood pressure, and literally starving your brain of oxygen.
Yeah, and the crazy part is you're doing it, what, 25,000 times a day?
Exactly, 25,000 times a day.
It is the ultimate blind spot in human health. I mean,
Yeah.
we treat respiration like a background process, right? Like an app running on your phone.
Yeah.
As long as air is going in and coming out, we just assume the machinery is working perfectly.
Right, it's that totally binary thinking. We look at breathing the same way we look at a heartbeat.
Yeah.
It's either happening, which means you're alive, or it's not, which means you're dead.
Right, there's no in-between for most people.
But today, we are going to tear that assumption completely down to the studs. The mission of this deep dive is to fundamentally revolutionize how you think about the most automatic thing your body does.
And we are pulling from a massive stack of research today.
We really are. It's largely anchored by James Nestor's phenomenal text, Breath, the New Science of a Lost Art.
And I should say, this isn't just a clinical overview of pulmonology.
No, not at all.
The sources take us through anthropology, ancient architectural shifts in the human skull, and some truly agonizing modern scientific experiments.
Agonizing is the word.
Yeah, and it's all to prove one central, really unsettling premise. Modern humans are unequivocally the worst breathers in the entire animal kingdom.
We are broken. I mean, statistically, practically all of us are doing this wrong. So to understand how to fix it, to get to these lost arts of perfect breathing, we can't just start with the lungs.
No, you have to go way back.
Way back. We have to look at the architectural collapse of the human face. Okay, let's unpack this.
So to frame this, we really need to introduce a biological concept known as disevolution.
Disevolution.
Right. It fundamentally challenges how we usually picture human progress. I mean, we're taught that evolution is a relentless march toward optimization, right?
Yeah, survival of the fittest. We adapt to become stronger and faster.
Exactly. Yeah. But evolution simply means change over time. It is entirely blind.
Meaning, change isn't always an upgrade.
Far from it. Disevolution occurs when an organism passes down traits that are actively detrimental to its health and survival. And it's almost always because its external environment shifted much faster than its biology could keep up.
And for our ancestors, the environment that changed practically overnight was the dinner plate.
Yes.
The sources take us back roughly 1.5 million years to Homo erectus. And if you look at early hominids before this point, their daily lives were entirely defined by mastication.
Just chewing. Constantly.
They were chewing for hours upon hours every single day. Raw roots, tough tubers, fibrous plants, raw meat.
You're talking about massive, repetitive, mechanical stress on the jawline from
Right.
dawn until dusk.
Right. But then Homo erectus discovers fire. They start cooking, they start mashing and tenderizing their food. And in the grand timeline of human history, this is like the ultimate biological life hack.
Oh, absolutely.
Cooked food breaks down the cell walls of plants. It denatures the proteins in meat. Suddenly, you can consume radically more calories,
And your body doesn't have to expend nearly as much energy trying to digest it all in the gut.
which changes everything.
It does. The expensive tissue hypothesis comes into play here.
Yeah.
The gut and the brain are both incredibly energy-hungry organs. So when our ancestors started outsourcing their digestion to the fire, meaning the fire did the hard work of breaking down the food before they even swallowed it, the human digestive tract actually shrank.
Wow.
Yeah, and all that surplus energy was reallocated upstairs.
The brain just explodes in size.
Exactly. It grew a massive 50% larger.
We developed these incredible, dense, hyper-intelligent brains that allowed us to basically dominate the planet. But, and I'm looking at the anatomy here, I'm realizing a glaring physical problem.
The space issue.
Right. If the brain grows by 50%, the skull doesn't just magically inflate like a balloon to accommodate it. It's finite real estate.
It's a total zero-sum game inside the human head.
Right. It's like packing a massive V8 engine into a tiny, compact car chassis. The brain essentially had to evict other structures to make room for itself.
And it expanded forward and downward. It stole that space directly from the front of the face.
It crushed the sinuses. It encroached on the mouth. Over thousands of generations, the prominent, elongated snout that our primate ancestors relied on for massive airflow was just completely squashed flat.
Leaving us with a distinct human nose, this weird, bony, protruding cartilage that essentially no other primate possesses.
Right.
But the collateral damage of this brain expansion went even deeper. Because the brain was pushing everything downward into the throat, it physically forced the human larynx, the voice box, to drop lower down the airway.
Which gave us the ability to speak.
Yes, A lower larynx means a longer vocal tract. That allows for the complex modulation of sound. We could form intricate languages, pass down stories, organize societies.
It's the bedrock of human civilization.
It is. But
Um,
the biological trade-off is absolutely terrifying.
because that dropped larynx created a massive open cavity at the back of the throat.
Right where the airway and the esophagus cross paths.
Yeah, and humans are the only mammals on Earth that can easily choke on our own food and die. I mean, if you look at a dog or a chimpanzee, their larynx sits high up, acting as an airtight valve.
They can breathe and swallow almost simultaneously.
Which is wild. We literally traded our respiratory safety for the ability to talk.
It's a profound compromise. But as the text points out, early humans managed to adapt to that specific anatomical bottleneck. I mean, the jaw was slightly smaller, but it's still robust enough to hold all our teeth and keep the airway open.
So it wasn't a total disaster yet.
Exactly.
Yeah.
The true disaster, the absolute architectural collapse of the face, didn't happen a million years ago. It happened about 300 years ago.
The dawn of the industrial age.
This is where disevolution hits terminal velocity.
We went from cooking our food over a fire to completely ruthlessly industrializing it. We invented modern milling.
Stripping everything.
Yeah, stripping the bran and germ from wheat to make hyper-soft white flour. We refined sugar. We canned vegetables until they literally turned to mush. We essentially removed all physical resistance from the human diet.
And to understand why this destroyed our airways, you have to understand the mechanism of bone growth. We tend to think of the skeleton as a static scaffolding, like it just grows to a predetermined genetic size and stops.
Like a frame of a house.
Right. But bone is living, highly responsive tissue. It requires intense mechanical stress to grow dense and wide. The technical term is osteogenesis.
Okay, so when our ancestors were gnawing on tough, fibrous food, the massive master muscles in their cheeks were constantly pulling and tugging on the jawbones.
And that pulling action signals stem cells in the facial sutures to build more bone. It literally pulls the face wider.
Wow.
But when you take away the chewing, when an entire population switches to soft bread, soups, and eventually things like protein shakes and smoothies, that mechanical stress completely disappears.
The bone just doesn't get the signal to grow.
Exactly. The lower half of the face becomes stunted. And here's where the domino effect ruins our breathing. When the jaw doesn't grow wide enough, the roof of the mouth, the hard palate, doesn't have the physical space to lay flat and wide like a U shape.
Right.
Instead, as the skull grows, the palate gets pushed upward into a sharp V shape.
And you have to look at what sits directly above the hard palate.
The nasal cavity.
Exactly. The floor of the nose is the roof of the mouth. So if the roof of your mouth is pushed upward into a high arch, it is literally crushing your nasal cavity from the bottom up.
It shrinks the sinus volume, it warps the delicate turbinates inside the nose, and it physically chokes off the airflow.
It's claustrophobic just thinking about it.
And furthermore, because the jaw is incredibly narrow, the teeth are trapped. They have nowhere to go. They erupt sideways, they crowd each other, they overlap. Humans are the only species on the planet that routinely suffer from malocclusion, which is crooked teeth.
James Nestor actually illustrates this beautifully in the book. He goes into the archives of the Morton Collection of Skulls in Philadelphia.
The skull archives, right?
Yeah. He's looking at human remains from thousands of years ago, long before the Industrial Revolution. And what he finds is astonishing. These ancient skulls have perfectly straight teeth.
Naturally straight.
Yes. No braces. They have massive, wide, forward-grown jaws. Their nasal apertures are huge. There are no impacted wisdom teeth.
Because their faces were simply large enough to hold the teeth they genetically inherited.
Right. And then you contrast that with today. The data shows that 90% of modern humans have some form of malocclusion. 90%.
We have fundamentally deformed our own faces in just a few generations.
It's terrifying, and I want to emphasize something from the research that shocked me. This isn't just about avoiding junk food. Even what we consider the absolute pinnacle of a healthy modern diet is dangerous in this specific mechanical context.
Oh, absolutely.
Smoothies, oatmeal, mashed avocados, nut butters. You can consume 3,000 calories of organic, nutrient-dense food a day without your teeth ever once needing to meet physical resistance.
We are starving our facial bones of the stress they need to develop. So, if the face is shrunk and the nasal cavity is crushed, the body is left with a desperate logistical problem. The brain needs oxygen. The nose cannot deliver enough of it. Where does the air go?
It has to find a back door.
Exactly.
Evolution forces us to open our mouths. Because our nasal passages are so compromised, it's estimated that up to half the population are habitual mouth breathers.
And this transition from the nose to the mouth is where the story moves from historical anthropology into a very modern, incredibly visceral medical horror story.
Oh man, the Stanford experiment.
Yeah. Nestor realized that looking at ancient skulls and reading the data wasn't enough to convey the danger. He needed to know exactly what mouth breathing does to the human physiology in real time.
Right.
So he teams up with a Swedish breathing researcher named Anders Olsson, and they enroll in a highly controlled 20-day experiment at Stanford University.
Overseen by the chief of rhinology research, Dr. Jayakar Nayak.
Yes. The design of this experiment is beautifully simple and utterly agonizing. It's broken into two phases. For the first 10 days, Nestor and Olsson are going to have their nostrils completely hermetically sealed.
Oh, I hate just hearing that.
Dr. Nayak packs their nasal cavities with silicone plugs and then seals the exterior with surgical tape. For 10 days, they are forced to breathe 100% of the time through their mouths. Eating, sleeping, exercising, working, total nasal obstruction.
I have to admit, just reading the methodology made me feel claustrophobic. And before they even seal him up, they shove these massive mascara brush-sized swabs deep into his nasal cavities to take bacterial cultures.
It's an incredibly invasive baseline.
Right. But the physical and psychological freefall that happens over those 10 days of mouth breathing is what's truly staggering. It wasn't just a nuisance. Their entire physiology collapsed.
Let's look at the polysomnography metrics, the sleep data. Before the experiment, James Nestor recorded exactly 0 minutes of snoring per night. He was a quiet sleeper.
Quiet sleeper, totally normal.
Within days of plugging his nose, the snoring exploded. He was rattling the room for hours a night. More terrifyingly, he developed severe obstructive sleep apnea.
He was literally choking on his own collapsed airway.
Exactly. His oxygen saturation levels plummeted repeatedly throughout the night as his brain was starved of air, forcing him to micro-awake in a panic just to take a gasp.
His blood pressure spiked into hypertensive territory. His heart rate variability, which is the measurement of the time gap between your heartbeats, and a massive indicator of nervous system health and stress resilience, it just absolutely tanked.
His body was essentially bathing in stress hormones, in catecholamines, just from the mechanical act of breathing through his mouth.
And the local environment of the nose deteriorated rapidly too, right?
Oh yeah, Nestor developed a nasty bacterial infection. A Corynebacterium bug completely colonized his nasal cavity. Without the constant flow of air to dry and circulate the environment, the inside of his face basically turned into a stagnant, infected swamp.
Ugh. But mechanically, I have to ask, why does this happen? Why does air flowing over the tongue instead of through the nose cause a grown man to develop sleep apnea in 48 hours?
What's fascinating here is it comes down to basic physics and fluid dynamics inside a biological tube.
Okay.
When you inhale a massive volume of air quickly through the mouth, you are radically decreasing the pressure in the back of the airway. It creates a localized vacuum effect. Now, remember those soft tissues at the back of the throat we talked about earlier?
Right, the dropped larynx and the squashed palate.
Exactly. When that negative pressure hits those loose, crowded tissues, it sucks them inward. They flex and collapse into the airway itself. The harder you try to breathe through your mouth, the stronger the vacuum becomes, and the more the tissue collapses.
This is a self-amplifying cycle of suffocation.
It really is. Furthermore, mouth breathing actually alters the physical tone of the airway over time. The more you use the mouth, the flabbier and weaker those tissues get, making them even more prone to collapsing the next night.
It's biological self-sabotage. But if it's this destructive, it begs a massive evolutionary question.
What's that?
If the mouth is so bad for breathing, if it causes apnea, hypertension, and infection, why didn't evolution just seal the mouth off from the airway entirely like it did in other animals? Like, why do we even have the ability to do it?
Because the mouth is an incredibly vital emergency override system. It is a brilliant backup generator. If you contract a severe respiratory infection and your nasal passages are completely blocked with mucus, the mouth ensures you don't suffocate.
Oh, sure.
Or if you are thrust into a state of extreme, sudden physical exertion, let's say you're a hunter-gatherer sprinting away from a lion, or you're an Olympic swimmer breaking the surface of the water, you need a massive, immediate dump of raw, unfiltered air to fuel the muscles. The mouth provides an unrestricted, high-volume pathway.
Okay, so it's the emergency exit door. You are profoundly grateful it's there when the building is on fire, but you don't prop it open and use it as your front door every single day.
That's the perfect way to contextualize it. Using your emergency system as your primary operating system is disastrous.
Right.
Because the mouth does absolutely zero prep work.
Right.
The lungs are highly sensitive organs. They expect air to be conditioned.
Which brings us to the absolute magic of the human nose and phase 2 of the Stanford experiment.
The relief phase.
Yeah. After 10 days of absolute misery, Dr. Nyack pulls the silicone plugs out of their noses. For the next 10 days, Nesser and Olson do the exact opposite. They tape their mouths shut with a small piece of surgical tape, forcing themselves to breathe only through their noses 24 hours a day.
And the reversal of their physical decay is almost instantaneous.
It's wild.
The blood pressure normalizes. The heart rate variability climbs back to healthy, resilient levels. The snoring drops from hours a night down to virtually zero.
And the infection.
The Corynebacterium infection clears up entirely on its own, eradicated by the renewed airflow.
It's like flipping a circuit breaker back on. So what is the nose doing to the air that the mouth isn't?
The internal architecture of the nose is a marvel of engineering. It acts as a highly sophisticated HVAC system. Its primary job is to filter, heat, and pressurize the air.
Right, because of the turbinates.
Exactly. Inside the nasal cavity, you have these seashell-like bone structures called turbinates, covered in mucus and cilia. They force the air to spin and spiral, catching dust, pathogens, allergens.
Well, it's a physical filter.
Yes, and by the time the air navigates this labyrinth and hits the lungs, it has been warmed to body temperature and perfectly humidified for cellular absorption.
But the sources reveal a secret weapon hidden in the sinuses, and this absolutely blew my mind. A molecule called nitric oxide.
This is one of the most crucial physiological discoveries of the last few decades. Nitric oxide is a potent vasodilator. It is produced continuously in the paranasal sinuses.
So when you breathe through your nose, the air physically sweeps through the sinuses, picks up this nitric oxide, and carries it down into the deepest lobes of the lungs.
And once it hits the lungs, it works its magic. Because it's a vasodilator, it forces the blood vessels and capillaries in the lungs to open wide. This massive expansion allows the lungs to absorb significantly more oxygen.
Like how much more?
The data shows that nasal breathing boosts nitric oxide levels 6-fold compared to mouth breathing. This allows your body to extract up to 18% more oxygen from the exact same volume of air.
Wait, 18% more oxygen just by keeping your lips together? That is an unbelievable biological advantage.
It really is.
The text even draws a line to the pharmaceutical industry here. The erectile dysfunction drug Viagra works on this exact same biochemical pathway. It artificially releases nitric oxide into the bloodstream to force capillaries open and engorge tissue with blood. So breathing through your nose is essentially giving your entire cardiovascular system a constant low-dose circulation boost.
It fundamentally improves the efficiency of your entire vascular network. But the nose doesn't stop at chemistry. It actually dictates the state of our nervous system. This brings us to a phenomenon called the nasal cycle.
Yes, the nasal cycle. I always assumed having 2 nostrils was just for facial symmetry, like a backup in case one got plugged. But they actually have entirely different, specialized jobs.
If you were to look inside your nose right now, you would find erectile tissue, very similar to the tissue in the reproductive organs. It is designed to engorge with blood and swell and then shrink back down.
Okay.
Throughout the day, your autonomic nervous system is constantly, quietly shifting the primary flow of air from one nostril to the other, usually cycling every few hours.
And the side that is currently open completely alters your brain chemistry.
Entirely. The right nostril is intimately connected to the sympathetic nervous system. It acts as the gas pedal.
So right means action.
Yes. When you pull air primarily through the right side, it stimulates your fight or flight response. It gently elevates your heart rate, pumps up your blood pressure, and increases cortisol. It actually shunts more blood flow to the opposite hemisphere of the brain, the left hemisphere, specifically the prefrontal cortex, which governs logical computation, decision-making, and language.
Wow. Breathing through the right nostril literally wakes you up and prepares you for action.
And the left nostril is the brake pedal.
Exactly. Breathing primarily through the left nostril activates the parasympathetic nervous system, the rest and digest state. It drops your blood pressure, cools the body temperature, and shifts blood flow to the right hemisphere of the brain, which is heavily associated with creative thought, spatial awareness, and emotional processing.
This is wild because ancient yogic texts documented this thousands of years ago. Practices like Nadi Shodhana, alternate nostril breathing, were built on the understanding that regulating which nasal channel you use could actively control your body temperature and your emotional state.
It's built-in climate control and psychological regulation right there in the center of your face.
So consider what you are sacrificing when you habitually breathe through your mouth. You bypass the filtration and heating system, you completely miss out on the 18% oxygen boost from nitric oxide, and you override your body's innate ability to balance its own nervous system via the nasal cycle.
So, step one of reclaiming this lost art is the simplest, hardest thing. Shut your mouth. Take it at night if you have to. But the research points out that getting the air in through the right channel is only half the battle.
It's the intake, yeah.
Once it's in the lungs, we have a massive mechanical failure in how we process it, and more importantly, how we let it out.
This moves us from the face down into the chest. The reality is, the vast majority of modern humans are functioning on a fraction of their actual lung capacity. We have become chronic chest breathers.
We take these short, clipped, shallow sips of air that barely expand the top ribs. And the consequence of taking such short breaths is that we never fully empty the tank. We leave this massive reservoir of stale, dead air sitting stagnant at the bottom of our lungs.
To understand the devastation of this trapped air, the sources introduce us to an unlikely pioneer named Carl Stoff.
Curl stuff, yes.
In the mid-20th century, Stoff wasn't a doctor or a pulmonologist. He was a renowned choral conductor. He worked with professional singers, and he possessed an unparalleled ear for respiratory mechanics.
He could hear how they were breathing.
Exactly. He noticed that singers who struggled to project or who constantly lost their pitch all shared the exact same mechanical flaw. They had incredibly weak exhalations. They would aggressively gasp for air, lock it high in their chest, and then run out of usable breath almost immediately.
Stoff became so obsessed with the mechanics of the exhale that he eventually took his theories completely out of the music world and into a Veterans Affairs hospital in New Jersey.
Quite a pivot.
Yeah, he volunteered to work with the worst respiratory cases in the country, terminal emphysema patients. These were men whose lungs had been destroyed by mustard gas in World War II or by decades of heavy smoking.
Just heartbreaking cases.
Their alveolar sacs had lost all their elastic recoil. They were confined to hospital beds, constantly gasping, essentially suffocating to death in slow motion. The medical consensus of the time was that this was a one-way street. There was no treatment.
But Stoff looked at these emphysema patients and recognized the exact same mechanical failure he saw in his struggling singers.
The weak exhale.
Right. He realized their primary problem wasn't a lack of incoming oxygen. It was a failure to evacuate. Because their lungs had lost elasticity, they couldn't passively push the old air out.
So they were desperately trying to inhale fresh air into a container that was already entirely full of stale, carbon dioxide-saturated air. Stoff called this trapped volume dead space.
His intervention was completely unorthodox. He ignored the inhale entirely. He focused 100% of his effort on retraining their diaphragms to push that dead space out.
We really need to pause and talk about the diaphragm because it is the absolute unsung hero of the human body. It's this massive, umbrella-shaped muscle that sits right at the base of the rib cage, separating the lungs from the digestive organs.
Its vertical movement is the engine of human respiration. When you take a proper breath, the diaphragm contracts and drops downward into the belly. This downward movement creates a powerful vacuum-negative pressure inside the chest cavity, which sucks air down into the deepest, most capillary-rich lobes of the lungs.
But it performs a secondary function that is absolutely vital to cardiovascular survival. It powers what physiologists call the thoracic pump.
This completely shifted my understanding of anatomy. Breathing isn't just about moving air, it's about moving blood.
Precisely. When that diaphragm drops and creates that massive negative pressure vacuum in the chest, it doesn't just suck air into the lungs. It literally vacuums venous blood from the furthest extremities of your body, your toes, your fingers, pulling it back up the veins and dumping it into the right atrium of the heart.
Wow.
And then, when you exhale, the diaphragm arches back up, shrinking the lung cavity, creating positive pressure that literally squeezes the heart and shoots the freshly oxygenated blood back out into the arteries.
The lungs and the diaphragm are acting as a secondary heart. They are physically assisting the cardiac muscle in pumping the blood.
Exactly. A healthy diaphragm moves up and down roughly 50,000 times a day. But if you are a shallow chest breather, if you are stressed, hunched over a laptop, taking tiny sips of air, your diaphragm is barely twitching. It's moving a fraction of an inch.
So the pump is weak.
Yeah, you are completely shortchanging the thoracic pump, which means your heart has to work exponentially harder to maintain circulation, driving up your blood pressure and wearing out the cardiac tissue.
So Carl Stoff starts physically manipulating these terminal emphysema patients. He places his hands on their lower ribs and manually coaches them to engage the diaphragm and exhale. to squeeze the ribs together and push every last singular molecule of stale air out of the dead space.
And the results defied medical logic.
They really did. These men, who were given weeks to live, started getting out of bed. They started walking around the ward. Their blood oxygen levels stabilized. He literally gave them their lives back by teaching them how to empty their lungs.
But the most illuminating chapter of Stuff's career wasn't with the sick. It was with the absolute pinnacle of human physical performance. In the 1960s, Stuff was recruited to consult for the Yale track and field team, and eventually the U.S. Olympic team.
These were elite, world record-holding sprinters.
Right. You would assume their respiratory mechanics were flawless.
But they were a mess. Stuff analyzed the Olympic sprinters and found they suffered from the exact same dysfunctional breathing pattern as the terminal emphysema patients in the VA hospital.
Oh my God.
They were breathing way too rapidly, entirely in their upper chests, completely neglecting the diaphragm and trapping massive amounts of stale air in their lungs during a sprint. They were elite athletes, pushing through unimaginable pain to win races, but they were literally vomiting, passing out, and collapsing at the finish line because they were suffocating themselves from the inside out.
Stuff completely rewired their mechanics. He trained them to focus exclusively on the exhale. A classic mistake sprinters make is holding a massive breath at the starting block, waiting for the gun. Stuff told them to exhale fully at the sound of the starter pistol, ensuring their very first action in the race was a massive, vacuum-powered inhale that reached the bottom of the lungs.
He developed a protocol called breathing coordination.
The sources outline the exercise he used, and it's something anyone can do right now to test their own diaphragm. It's incredibly revealing.
How does it work?
You sit up perfectly straight, you take a gentle, normal breath in through the nose, and then as you begin to exhale, you start counting aloud from 1 to 10 over and over again. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10. 1, 2, 3, 4.
The trick is you do not stop. When you reach the point where you feel completely empty, where your brain tells you that you must inhale, you keep counting.
You drop to a whisper, then a sub-whisper. You just keep moving your lips and tightening your core. You will feel your abdominal muscles aggressively contract. You will feel your lower ribs physically squeeze inward.
Bringing it out.
Yeah, you push and push until you have wrung the lungs out like a wet sponge and there is absolutely zero air left.
And then you simply relax your abdomen. You don't even have to try to inhale.
Right, the body acts like a vacuum seal being broken. The air just violently rushes in through your nose to fill the void. It feels completely effortless.
By doing that, you've evacuated the dead space and engaged the full range of the diaphragm. Stuff's athletes use this exact coordination to shatter records and win Olympic gold medals without collapsing at the finish line.
So we have the baseline mechanics. Nasal breathing to filter and absorb, and full diaphragmatic exhales to clear the dead space and pump the blood. But before we dive into the actual chemistry of the air itself, we have to address a lingering anxiety from our first topic.
The skeletal stuff.
Yeah. If our faces are structurally compromised by disevolution, if we all have V-shaped palates and crushed nasal cavities from eating soft food, are we just permanently doomed to struggle with this? Like if I'm 40 years old, my skeleton is locked in, right?
That is the most empowering revelation of the research. No, you are not doomed. While the long bones in your legs and arms fuse and stop growing in your 20s, the bones in your face, specifically the maxilla, the massive bone that houses the upper teeth and forms the floor of the nose, remain incredibly plastic.
They can still change.
They can expand, remodel, and grow into your 70s and beyond.
Which means we can physically rebuild our crushed airways. And the way we do it is by hacking the osteogenesis mechanism we lost. We have to bring chewing back.
It requires simulating the mechanical stress our ancestors endured.
The sources talk about incorporating rougher, raw foods into your daily routine. This isn't about the nutritional macros. This is a physical workout for the structural integrity of your skull. We're talking about raw carrots, tough cuts of meat, mastication gum that is significantly harder than regular chewing gum. You have to give the master muscles a reason to pull on the bone.
And equally critical to chewing is the concept of resting oral posture. This is a game changer for facial structure.
The proper posture is lips completely sealed, teeth lightly touching or slightly apart, and most importantly, the entire body of the tongue pressed flat against the roof of the mouth.
The tongue is an incredibly powerful, dense muscle. When you rest it flat against the hard palate, it acts as a permanent internal scaffold. It applies a constant, gentle outward and upward pressure against the maxillary bones.
Some practitioners refer to this technique as mewing, named after the British orthodontist Dr. John Mew, who popularized the concept of orthotropics. Over months and years, that constant pressure from the tongue can literally force the maxillary sutures to remodel.
Pushing it out.
Exactly. It pushes that narrow, crushed V shape back out into a wide, shallow U shape. As the palate widens, the nasal cavity above it physically expands, opening up the airway without a single surgical incision.
It's structural rehabilitation. You stimulate the stem cells, widen the airway, and permanently improve the physics of your breathing.
Okay, so that is the complete mechanical toolkit. Chew your food to build the bone, keep your tongue on the roof of your mouth to scaffold the palate, tape your lips if you have to so you breathe exclusively through the nose, and ensure your diaphragm is moving fully to clear the dead space.
But now we have to transition from the physical plumbing to the invisible biochemistry.
Here's where it gets really interesting, because this part of the deep dive breaks every rule of basic biology I thought I knew. I feel like my entire life I've been sold a very specific, aggressive narrative about the gases in our bodies.
The good guy, bad guy narrative.
Yes. Oxygen is the absolute hero. It's the fuel of life. It's pure energy. Carbon dioxide is the villain. It's a toxic waste product. It's the cellular smog that comes out of the exhaust pipe. And your only goal is to breathe as deeply as possible to get maximum oxygen in and blow all that dirty carbon dioxide out.
It is arguably the most pervasive physiological myth in modern culture.
Yeah.
And biochemically, it is entirely backward.
Let me stop you right there. Are you seriously telling me that breathing more oxygen is somehow a bad thing? That sounds like a typo in the research.
To understand why the narrative is wrong, we have to travel back over a century and introduce a Danish physiologist named Christian Bohr. Bohr was obsessed with the mechanics of respiration in animals. He was bleeding chickens, dogs, and guinea pigs, trying to understand how blood actually functions. Now, he knew that oxygen was the ultimate fuel for the mitochondria inside our cells. And he knew that a protein inside our red blood cells, called hemoglobin, was the transporter that carried the oxygen from the lungs through the circulatory system.
I picture hemoglobin like a fleet of microscopic cruise ships floating down the arteries, and the oxygen molecules are the passengers sitting on the deck.
That's a great visual. But Bohr asked a brilliant, overlooked question. How does the hemoglobin know when and where to drop off the passengers? It doesn't just randomly dump oxygen everywhere equally. If you are doing bicep curls, your bicep muscle needs exponentially more oxygen than your resting calf muscle. What is the specific chemical signal that tells the hemoglobin cruise ship, hey, release the payload right here, right now?
He exposed blood to dozens of different gas mixtures to find the trigger.
And he discovered a phenomenon that won his colleague a Nobel Prize and is now codified in medical textbooks as the Bohr effect. The specific trigger that forces hemoglobin to release its grip on oxygen is carbon dioxide.
Carbon dioxide is the divorce lawyer. It physically breaks the bond between the red blood cell and the oxygen molecule.
Let's break down the exact mechanism of supply and demand. When a muscle cell, like that bicep doing a curl, works hard, it burns energy and produces carbon dioxide as a metabolic byproduct. That CO2 spills out of the cell and into the localized bloodstream.
And carbon dioxide is highly acidic. So in that exact spot around the bicep, the blood pH drops and becomes acidic.
And when the hemoglobin cruise ship floats through that specific acidic, CO2-rich environment,
The carbon dioxide actually alters the physical three-dimensional shape of the hemoglobin protein. It bends it.
that bending forces the hemoglobin to eject the oxygen molecule, delivering the fuel precisely to the working tissue that generated the CO2 in the first place.
Let me try a different analogy to make sure I have the mechanics of this locked in because it's so counterintuitive. Think of the hemoglobin like a powerful electromagnet, and the oxygen is a piece of iron. By default, they are stuck together incredibly tight. You can't pull them apart. But carbon dioxide acts like intense heat. When you apply heat to a magnet, it temporarily loses its magnetic charge and the iron just falls off. No heat, no drop-off, no carbon dioxide, no oxygen delivery.
That is precisely how the biochemistry operates, and realizing this instantly illuminates why our instinctual reaction to panic is so dangerous.
Right. If you are feeling anxious or you're having a panic attack, what is the first thing everyone tells you to do? Take a deep breath, breathe heavily, get some oxygen.
But if you huff and puff and you hyperventilate,
You are rapidly blowing massive amounts of carbon dioxide out of your lungs. You are purging the gas from your bloodstream.
and according to the Bohr effect, if you purge the heat, the magnet stays locked.
Exactly. Without sufficient carbon dioxide in the blood, the oxygen remains tightly bound to the hemoglobin. The red blood cells just circulate right past your starving tissues, your working muscles, and your brain. They take the oxygen back to the lungs without ever delivering it.
Which explains the physical symptoms of hyperventilating. When you breathe too fast, you get lightheaded, you get dizzy, your fingers start to tingle, you might even black out.
You intuitively assume, oh, I'm dizzy, I must need more oxygen, I need to breathe harder.
But the reality is, your blood is already completely saturated with oxygen. You are lightheaded because your brain is literally suffocating from a lack of oxygen, all because you blew off the carbon dioxide required to release it.
By breathing more air, you are actively starving your body of oxygen. Yandell Henderson, a prominent Yale physiologist from the early 20th century, stated it plainly. Carbon dioxide is the chief hormone of the entire human body. We carry roughly 100 times more carbon dioxide in our tissues than oxygen.
It is the fundamental gear of living matter. Furthermore, CO2 is a potent vasodilator. Just like nitric oxide, the presence of carbon dioxide actively forces the smooth muscles around your blood vessels to relax and open wide, ensuring massive blood flow to the brain and organs. When you blow off CO2, those vessels constrict violently.
And the mind-blowing facts about carbon dioxide don't stop at the vascular level. The sources dive into the cellular metabolism of weight loss, which completely shatters another biological myth.
Oh, this part is fascinating.
If you walk down the street and ask 100 people, when you burn fat, where does it physically go? I guarantee 99 of them will say you burn it off as heat energy, or you sweat it out in the gym, or you excrete it.
But the laws of conservation of mass tell a completely different story.
The math here is undeniable. For every 10 pounds of fat lost in the human body, 8.5 pounds of it is physically exhaled through the lungs as carbon dioxide.
That sounds like science fiction.
Let me repeat it, because it does. 8.5 out of 10 pounds of fat literally leaves your body as invisible breath.
It comes down to the Krebs cycle. Fat molecules, triglycerides, are primarily composed of carbon, hydrogen, and oxygen atoms. When your body metabolizes that fat for energy, it rips those molecules apart. The hydrogen binds with oxygen to form a little bit of water, which you do sweat or urinate out, but the vast majority of the mass, the heavy carbon atoms, bind with oxygen to form CO2.
And the only way the body can expel that CO2 is through the lungs. You literally breathe your fat away. The respiratory system is the primary weight-regulating organ of the human body.
So when we talk about respiratory efficiency, we are not just talking about feeling relaxed or achieving mindfulness. We are talking about the foundational mechanics of cellular metabolism, tissue oxygenation, and systemic health.
It's all connected.
A healthy human being is already walking around with 97 to 99% blood oxygen saturation. Taking a bigger gulp of air doesn't add any more oxygen to the system. The hemoglobin is already full. What our bodies desperately need is to retain more carbon dioxide to actually unlock the oxygen we already possess.
So the grand takeaway here is that if we want to be healthy, we have to build up our tolerance to carbon dioxide. We have to stop unnecessarily purging it, which leads us into the incredible clinical applications of this theory.
All right.
Because if expelling too much CO2 starves our tissues and constricts our blood vessels, what happens when we train ourselves to breathe less?
This brings us to a stern, brilliant Ukrainian cardiologist named Konstantin Buteyko. In the 1950s, Buteyko is doing his residency in a massive hospital in Russia. He spends his days walking the wards, observing patients. He's a meticulous note-taker, and he starts tracking the resting respiratory volume of every patient he treats.
And he uncovers a glaring, undeniable pattern.
He notices that the sickest patients in the hospital, the ones suffering from severe asthma, chronic hypertension, heart disease, and anxiety, are all breathing a massive amount of air.
They are chronic overbreathers. They are inhaling and exhaling anywhere from 10 to 15 liters of air every single minute. Often they are breathing through their mouths. Their respiration is loud, labored, and highly visible in the rise and fall of their upper chests.
And what about the healthy people?
The patients with no chronic illness are breathing almost imperceptibly. They are moving about 5 to 6 liters of air a minute. Their breaths are slow, quiet, driven by the diaphragm, and exclusively through the nose.
So Buteyko looks at this data and flips the medical consensus on its head. He hypothesizes that the heavy, labored breathing isn't a symptom of their sickness. The heavy breathing is the cause of their sickness.
He dives into the biochemistry of chronic hyperventilation. We've already discussed the Bohr effect and how blowing off CO2 starves the brain of oxygen, but Buteyko looked at another massive systemic consequence: blood pH.
The human body is obsessed with homeostasis. It is a highly sensitive machine that wants the blood pH to remain exactly at 7.4. Not too acidic, not too alkaline.
And remember, carbon dioxide acts as an acid in the blood. When you overbreathe and constantly blow off too much CO2, your blood loses its acidity. The pH rises, it becomes too alkaline.
And the body views this alkaline shift as a massive biological emergency. If the pH drifts too far, cellular functions shut down and you die. So the body has to aggressively intervene to bring the pH back down to 7.4.
It does this by deploying the kidneys. The kidneys perform a chemical triage called buffering. They actively filter out an alkaline compound called bicarbonate and excrete it into your urine. By dumping the alkaline bicarbonate, the blood becomes relatively more acidic, returning the pH to a safe 7.4.
Which sounds like a brilliant save by the kidneys. The system works.
It is a brilliant save for an acute emergency like if you hyperventilated for 5 minutes running from a bear. It is designed to be a temporary fix. But consider the asthmatic patient who is overbreathing 15 liters of air a minute, 24 hours a day, year after year. Their kidneys are permanently locked in buffering mode.
And here is where the devastating collateral damage occurs. When the kidneys constantly excrete that bicarbonate into the urine, the bicarbonate acts like a chemical magnet. It drags massive amounts of essential minerals out of the body with it.
It drains the blood of magnesium, phosphorus, and potassium.
And what happens to human physiology when you completely deplete its magnesium stores?
The nervous system misfires. Nerves become hyperexcitable. And most importantly, smooth muscles throughout the body begin to spasm and rigidly constrict.
Wait, the airways, the bronchioles inside the lungs, are wrapped entirely in smooth muscle.
Exactly. The chronic overbreathing depletes the CO2. The dropped CO2 forces the kidneys to dump bicarbonate and magnesium. The lack of magnesium causes the smooth muscles around the airways to violently spasm and constrict,
Which causes an asthma attack. It is a complete self-fulfilling prophecy of suffocation. The asthmatic feels short of breath, so they breathe heavier. Breathing heavier drops their CO2, which triggers the smooth muscles to spasm, which closes their airway even further. The more they breathe, the more they choke.
When Buteyko realized this vicious cycle, he developed a radical therapy. He called it the voluntary elimination of deep breathing. He didn't give his patients bronchodilators or oxygen masks. He sat them down and essentially forced them to breathe less. He trained them to tolerate the uncomfortable sensation of air hunger.
He would have them restrict their breathing volume to a tiny trickle. He would instruct them to exhale, pinch their noses, and hold their breath until they were physically sweating, purposefully pushing their internal CO2 levels higher and higher.
And the clinical results were nothing short of miraculous. Patients who had been crippled by lifelong, debilitating asthma were suddenly throwing away their inhalers. By forcing their CO2 levels back up, the smooth muscles in their airways relaxed, the spasms stopped, their blood pressure plummeted back to normal. Chronic migraines vanished.
Decades later, modern science fully validated Buteyko's radical theories. The sources detail a fascinating clinical trial run by Dr. Alicia Murray at Southern Methodist University. She took a group of severe asthmatics and strapped capnometers to them, devices that constantly measure the exact percentage of carbon dioxide in every exhaled breath.
She found that every single asthma attack was preceded by an unconscious drop in carbon dioxide. Hours before the patient even felt the attack coming on, their breathing volume would slightly increase, their CO2 would drop, and the physiological trap would be set.
So Dr. Murray instructed the patients to monitor the capnometers. The moment they saw their CO2 dropping, they were to consciously suppress their breathing, to breathe slow, shallow, and light, driving the CO2 back up to a healthy 5.5%. And by doing that, they literally reversed the asthma attacks before the airway ever constricted. The carbon dioxide physically acted as a bronchodilator.
But the implications of CO2 tolerance go far beyond respiratory illness. Dr. Murray took the exact same capnometer therapy and applied it to patients suffering from severe panic attacks and anxiety disorders.
Now, this is where the research gets deeply psychological. Because culturally, we tend to view panic attacks as a purely mental phenomenon, a software glitch. It's all in your head. You have a stressful thought, you panic, and then you start hyperventilating.
It is in your head, but the sources prove it is a profound physiological hardware issue, not just a psychological one. To understand the genesis of a panic attack, we have to look deep inside the brainstem at tiny clusters of neurons called central chemoreceptors.
These chemoreceptors are the body's ultimate alarm system. They're constantly tasting the cerebrospinal fluid, monitoring the acidity of your blood, and as we know, blood acidity is dictated directly by carbon dioxide levels.
The sources bring up a truly unbelievable case study that proves how powerful these sensors are. Researchers were studying a woman known in the medical literature as SM. She suffered from an extremely rare genetic disease that had completely calcified and destroyed her amygdalae, the twin almond-shaped structures in the brain that generate the emotion of fear.
She was literally incapable of feeling fear. The researchers put her through a gauntlet. They handled massive, aggressive snakes in front of her. They took her to a famously terrifying haunted house. They showed her horror movies. She felt absolutely zero fear response. She was completely immune to external panic.
Until the researchers placed a mask over her face and delivered a single, concentrated hit of carbon dioxide gas.
The reaction was explosive. This woman, who couldn't be scared by a gun to her head, absolutely lost her mind. She ripped the mask off, thrashing around, screaming for help, completely consumed by an overwhelming primal panic attack.
Why did that happen? Because the panic wasn't generated by the amygdala evaluating an external psychological threat. The panic was generated by the chemoreceptors deep in the brainstem. They detected a massive, sudden spike in carbon dioxide, and they bypassed the emotional centers entirely, firing the most primal, non-negotiable survival alarm in the human nervous system. You are suffocating. Breathe heavily right now or you will die.
What this case study illuminates is that our threshold for carbon dioxide is intimately linked to our baseline anxiety levels. People who suffer from chronic panic attacks almost invariably have hypersensitive chemoreceptors. Their brainstem's alarm is set on a hair trigger.
So they unconsciously overbreathe throughout the entire day. They take big sighs, they breathe through their mouths, keeping their CO2 levels artificially rock bottom, desperately trying to avoid triggering that suffocating alarm.
But the tragic irony is that by constantly purging their CO2, they keep their entire autonomic nervous system in a permanent state of high alert, sympathetic overdrive. They are stuck in fight or flight.
But the fix is incredibly empowering. By practicing hypoventilation, by consciously breathing less, extending the time between breaths, taking light nasal breaths, you slowly expose your brain to higher levels of CO2. You train those chemoreceptors to calm down. You build tolerance. You literally physically widen the bandwidth of your nervous system's stress threshold, overriding the brain's panic alarms.
And this carbon dioxide tolerance isn't just a clinical intervention for sick or anxious people. The athletic applications are jaw-dropping. If you want to see the absolute zenith of CO2 tolerance, you look at Emil Zatopek.
The legendary Czechoslovakian long-distance runner. Zatopek won 3 gold medals at the 1952 Olympics in Helsinki, and he did it using a training method that people thought was absolute insanity. He pioneered what we now call hypoxic training.
He would go out for a run, and he would intentionally hold his breath while sprinting. He would run for dozens of paces without taking a single sip of air, pushing himself until his face turned blue and he felt like he was going to pass out.
He was voluntarily restricting his oxygen intake, forcing his muscles to accumulate massive burning amounts of carbon dioxide and lactic acid.
By doing this at sea level, Zatopek was biologically hacking his body to adapt as if he were training at high altitude in the Himalayas. The extreme artificial buildup of CO2 and the lack of oxygen triggers the kidneys to release a hormone called erythropoietin, or EPO.
ETO stimulates the bone marrow to pump out a massive surplus of red blood cells.
Exactly. Zatopek was forcing his body to build a vastly larger fleet of hemoglobin cruise ships. He taught his cells to pull immense amounts of energy during states of heavy anaerobic stress. He trained his metabolism to be ruthlessly, chemically efficient.
He weaponized carbon dioxide. Whether you are an asthmatic trying to walk up the stairs, an anxious person trying to navigate a stressful meeting, or an Olympian trying to break a world record, the biological truth remains exactly the same. Carbon dioxide is the key that unlocks the body's true potential. Okay, learner, let's bring all of these disparate pieces together. We've established the biological rules.
Right, the new rules.
We know the body demands nasal breathing to filter the air, boost nitric oxide, and dictate the nervous system. We know it demands full, diaphragmatic exhales to clear the dead space and physically pump the blood. And we now know it demands less air overall to retain carbon dioxide, dilate our blood vessels, and calm the chemoreceptors in our brainstem. So, with all that science in mind, what does the optimal everyday breath actually look like? If I'm just sitting at my desk or driving my car, how exactly should I be breathing?
The research has distilled thousands of years of human experimentation into a remarkably precise mathematical equation. The target for the perfect breath is exactly this: A gentle inhale through the nose for 5.5 seconds, followed by a gentle exhale through the nose for 5.5 seconds.
That equals exactly 5.5 breaths per minute.
And beautifully, it moves roughly 5.5 liters of air per minute. 5.5 in is 5.5 out.
The symmetry of that equation is stunning. But what truly elevated this from a neat scientific finding to a profound historical realization was a study done by Italian researchers at the University of Pavia. They didn't just want to look at athletes or asthmatics. They wanted to look at history.
They gathered a group of subjects and hooked them up to a battery of sensors measuring cerebral blood flow, heart rate, and autonomic nervous system feedback. They then asked the subjects to recite various ancient prayers, chants, and mantras from completely different cultures around the globe.
And the data they got back was astonishing. When the subjects recited the traditional Latin Catholic rosary, specifically the Ave Maria prayer, the exact phrasing and cadence inadvertently forced the speaker into a breathing cycle of exactly 5.5 breaths per minute.
But the Pavia researchers didn't stop there. They tested ancient Buddhist mantras. They tested the traditional Hindu chanting of Om. They tested Native American rhythmic chants and Taoist breathing forms.
Every single one of these disparate cultural practices, developed completely independently, oceans apart over thousands of years of human history, locked the practitioner into the exact same 5.5-second respiratory cycle.
What is so fascinating about this specific rhythm is the profound physiological state it induces. When you slow your respiration down to exactly 5.5 breaths per minute, your breathing perfectly aligns with your natural cardiovascular rhythms, specifically fluctuations in blood pressure known as Mayer waves.
When the breathing rhythm and the Mayer wave synchronize, the body enters a state called coherence.
Coherence is absolute biological harmony. It's like all the disparate systems of the body, the cardiac muscle, the pulmonary system, the nervous system, stop competing and suddenly start playing in the exact same key. The blood pressure drops effortlessly. The heart rate variability skyrockets, indicating immense resilience. The parasympathetic nervous system takes the wheel. The body achieves peak circulatory efficiency with the lowest possible expenditure of metabolic energy.
The ancients didn't have capnometers or electrocardiograms. They didn't know the biochemistry of nitric oxide or the Bohr effect. But through centuries of quiet observation, they hacked the human nervous system. They knew this specific rhythm healed them.
However, the sources make one final crucial distinction. While the 5.5-second perfect breath is the absolute gold standard for our daily resting baseline, there is also a profound biological need for the exact opposite. There's a physiological necessity for occasional extreme stress.
Which brings us to the final piece of the puzzle. TUMO, or what is wildly popular today as the Wim Hof method. This is where we deliberately break the rule of breathe less.
Yes. Tumo is an ancient Tibetan practice that involves cycles of intense, deliberate hyperventilation, taking massive, heavy, rapid breaths in and out, followed by extreme, prolonged breath holds on the exhale.
You take 30 massive, wave-like breaths, violently blowing huge amounts of carbon dioxide out of your system. You are actively pushing your body into a state of sympathetic overload. You are triggering the fight-or-flight response on command. Adrenaline spikes. Cortisol floods the bloodstream.
You are revving the biological engine into the red line. But then, on the 30th breath, you exhale all the air, and you just stop breathing. You hold your breath for 1 minute, 2 minutes, maybe even 3 minutes.
As you hold your breath, the chemistry violently reverses. The carbon dioxide comes crashing back into the system, piling up in the blood. The oxygen levels plummet into high toxic territory.
This extreme, controlled flip-flopping is the magic of the technique. It is a deliberate, conscious disruption. You are forcing the body into maximum stress, and then immediately forcing it into profound relaxation.
But why? If we just spent the last 40 minutes establishing that chronic stress and hyperventilation are killing us, why would we intentionally trigger it?
Because it teaches the autonomic nervous system flexibility. The tragedy of modern life is that most of us are stuck in a state of low-grade chronic stress. The engine is always idling too high from traffic, emails, soft diets, mouth breathing. By deliberately, consciously revving the engine to its absolute maximum limit and then completely shutting it off, you reset the software. You train the chemoreceptors and the nervous system that it can handle extreme physiological shifts and successfully return to homeostasis.
As one of the practitioners in the book stated, it allows us to bend so that we don't break. You stop being a passive passenger to your anxiety and you become the pilot of your own nervous system. So, what does this all mean for you right now? Let's summarize the toolkit we've gathered from the millions of years of anthropology, the pulmonauts, the ancient yogis, and the modern clinical trials. Number 1, shut your mouth. Nasal breathing is non-negotiable for filtration, nitric oxide, and autonomic balance. Number 2, give your skull a workout. Chew your food and maintain proper oral posture, tongue flat against the roof of the mouth to keep that airway wide. Number 3, focus on the exhale. Engage that diaphragm, wring out the dead space, and let your lungs act as a second heart. Number 4, breathe slow and breathe less. Aim for that 5.5 seconds in, 5.5 seconds out to build up your carbon dioxide and finally unlock the oxygen your cells are starving for. And number 5, don't be afraid to occasionally deliberately stress the system with heavy breathing to build your physiological resilience.
If we connect this to the bigger picture, it is a total paradigm shift. We have spent our entire lives treating the breath as a passive biological metronome that just happens to us. But the science proves it is an active tool. It is a medicine. It is the forgotten missing pillar of human health, right alongside diet and movement.
And as we wrap up this deep dive, we want to leave you with one final lingering thought to chew on, because as deep as we've gone into the architecture of the skull, the mechanics of the diaphragm, and the biochemistry of the blood, the rabbit hole goes even deeper, down to the literal subatomic level of your existence.
This profound insight comes from the work of Nobel laureate Albert Szent-Györgyi. He wasn't satisfied with studying organs or cells. He wanted to understand how life actually extracts energy from air at the most fundamental level of quantum physics. He looked at the electrons spinning within our atoms.
He theorized that life itself is entirely defined by electron reactivity. All living matter is just a complex dance of energy. Szent-Györgyi explained that oxygen is an incredibly potent electron acceptor. When we breathe slowly, deeply, and continuously through the nose, we flood our tissues with a constant, stable presence of this oxygen, which keeps the electrons in our cells highly reactive, moving, and energetic.
But he posed a terrifying question. What happens when cells lose that ability to attract and utilize oxygen? What happens when we mouth breathe, blow off our CO2, and that subatomic electron reactivity slows down and stops?
Szent-Györgyi said the tissues literally rust, in much the same way a piece of iron rusts and degrades when its electrons break down. But in the human body, we don't call it tissue rust, we call it cancer. Cancer is fundamentally a process that thrives in low oxygen, low reactivity, anaerobic environments. So when you change the mechanical way you breathe, you aren't just trying to stop snoring or lower your blood pressure or calm your anxiety. Every single breath you take is literally dictating the subatomic energy state of your physical matter. You are deciding 25,000 times a day whether your tissues will thrive and react or whether they will suffocate and rust.
It is a staggering realization. You hold the ultimate power of cellular life and death right there in your nostrils.
So the next time you think about your body as a simple machine and your health as a binary X-ray, broken or not broken, breathing or not breathing, remember that the picture is infinitely deeper. The X-ray doesn't capture the millions of years of disevolution. It doesn't show the carbon dioxide unlocking the cargo doors to your cells. But now you have the mechanics. You have the keys. Shut your mouth, breathe slow, and enjoy the rest of your day. Thanks for joining us on this deep dive.